Hello, and welcome to Denton's Tales. Now, everybody loves a wedding, or so they say, and they should know because they tend to say quite a lot about just about everything. So, in this video, I am looking at a wedding. Oh, yes, I am looking at a wedding from Old Norse mythology and its aftermath. A rather unusual wedding, to be sure. Not as dramatic and eventually bloody as when Thor dressed as a woman in order to retrieve his hammer and Mjolnir, but still not quite the way marriages are usually arranged. It is the wedding of Skadi and Njord, the combination of solid ice and liquid water in marital form, you might say. Njord connected with the sea, and Skadi with ice and snow. Skadi was a Jotun, a giant, and a beautiful woman as well, later described by Odin himself as the shining bride of the gods. And she is often referred to as the goddess of winter. Yes, but actually, despite often being referred to as the goddess of winter, she had nothing whatever to do with that season. No, she enjoyed the snow and the ice. She loved the cold of winter, a powerful woman who delighted in hunting with her bow and skiing amid the snow-covered mountains, hunting for the various creatures that lived in her realm of perpetual winter, which was hardly surprising, since her home was a hall called Thrymheimr, the home of thunder, located high in the snow-covered mountains of Jotunheim, the realm of the giants. But she did not cause winter. She didn't control it. It happened every year all by itself without any assistance from her. So her popular image as goddess of winter is quite incorrect. She had about as much to do with it as do the tourists who flock to Switzerland or the ski resorts of the Rocky Mountains in the USA each year to do pretty much what she actually did. They ski and they enjoy the winter. And that was just about as much as Skadi's connection was with that season of the year. Now her father, oh, her father. He was a rather strange individual, to put it mildly. Also a Jotun, of course, named Thiatsi. But before we proceed, it's important to say a few words about the Norse concept of giants. They were not huge, massive creatures like the giants in Game of Thrones or Jack and the Beanstalk, for example. They weren't generally any bigger than anyone else, and the term Jotun, singular, or Jotnar, plural, comes from a root meaning to eat, to consume. So they should perhaps be seen as big eaters, gluttons, I suppose, if you like, rather than as the usual fairy tale idea of giants as one might find in the tales by the brothers Grimm. As something enormous, crashing through forests, uprooting trees, and saying things like, "Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman." Yes. No, the translation of Jotun as giant is perhaps rather unfortunate. I think something like the hungry ones or the consumers. That might be more appropriate. And while they were often regarded as, well, a bit undesirable, not always particularly nice or trustworthy, nevertheless, they sometimes even intermarried with the gods. I mean, Thor was the son of Odin and a Jotun woman, for example, and both of Tyr's parents were Jotnar, making him a Jotun himself, of course. And the goddess Hel was also a Jotun. Now, this Thiazi had a very interesting habit of flying around in the form of an eagle, which is a neat trick if you can do it. And on one of his little raptor excursions, he flew a bit too low, and he was hit with a stick by Loki. Now, I'm sure whacking low-flying eagles with a stick was a very fun pastime, but on this occasion it rather backfired on Loki, since Eagle Thiazi flew straight up into the air, but Loki couldn't let go. He and the stick were now magically attached to the bird, which really served him right from a cruelty to animals point of view, I'm sure. And he was pulled up high into the air, being slammed painfully against trees and rocks on the way up, but unable to let go no matter how hard he tried. He could not break the bond with the bird. The eagle, no doubt thoroughly enjoying Loki's oohs and ouches and ahs as he bounced off rocks and trees and things, the eagle came up with a plan. He offered Loki that he would release him on condition that he will help him to kidnap Idun and her magic apples of youth, rising higher and higher into the sky as he was, and the ground getting further and further away. Loki agrees. Not, I suppose, that he really had very much choice. And the eagle then returns him to the ground. Now, this is where things get a bit strange, really, because instead of simply going back into Osgard, thumbing his nose at the eagle, ignoring his promise, which had been given under duress after all, and was therefore actually meaningless, and Loki was hardly someone who really worried very much about honor and principles to begin with at the best of times. But for some reason, he actually kept his word. Now, possibly the idea of a bit of mischievous trickery appealed to him. That could be an explanation for that behavior. So he goes to Idun, and excitedly he tells her that he's found a wonderful forest with beautiful apples in it, and she should come and see them. Oh yes, yes, come and see them, come and see them. They're so beautiful. Bring all your own apples as well. Why? She probably asked. Well, yeah, well, you can compare them. You see, yes, yes, you can compare them with your own apples. So bring all your own apples. Now, this is Loki, after all, and perhaps she should have been somewhat, concerned at him wanting to bring all her own apples. Just one would do for a comparison. So why bring the whole basket for? For that matter, she could just bring back some of the new apples and compare them with her own ones when she got home. But Idun, obviously not being the sharpest card in the pack, agrees, and she goes with him. As soon, of course, as she gets a little way outside of Asgard, she is promptly grabbed by Thiazi in his eagle form and carried away to Jotunheim. Oh, surprise. Didn't see that one coming. Without Idun's apples, the gods begin to grow old. They begin to look a bit like me. Their hair starts to turn grey, and they get together, trying to find out who was the last to see Idun and might know what could have happened to her. They quickly discover that she hasn't been seen since she left Asgard with Loki. Ah, Loki. Well, that figured, I suppose. After suitable persuasive measures, shall we say, were taken to get Loki to talk, he admits his role in the business. But he says that he can fix this. If Freya will lend him her feather skin, as it's called, a garment made of hawk feathers that enables her to fly, he will make up for his actions and fly to Jotunheim and try to recover Idun, which he does. Very, very noble of him, of course. Not that he had the slightest bit of choice in the matter. It was a fly or die situation. Now he finds Idun alone, he turns her into a nut, and thus easy to carry. And in the form of a falcon, he takes her back to Asgard, gripped in his talon. Now, Thiazi has spotted him. He assumes his eagle form and he sets off in pursuit. Loki manages to get there first. He lands safely in Asgard, but the eagle is brought down and Thiazi is killed by the rather pissed off gods. Now, of course, her father had committed kidnapping by taking Idun. You could probably add assault and battery too, since he actually touched her, and theft by taking her apples. And one could say he got what he richly deserved, which of course he did. But Skadi wasn't interested in the legal niceties of the business. She loved her father. And regardless of his crimes and the fact that he actually deserved being squished by the gods, she wanted vengeance. Oh, you pissed off Skadi at your peril, something the gods hadn't considered. And she puts on her armor, takes her weapons, and she heads for Asgard, thirsting for blood. Now, for those who might say, and they frequently do, that women never fought as warriors in Old Norse times, even though there's considerable evidence that in fact they occasionally did, this in itself shows that the concept, which is a very important point, of a woman fighting in combat was accepted by the Old Norse, since Skadi doesn't borrow her armor and weapons from some male warrior. A sort of, oh, I say, Olaf, could I borrow your weapons and armor for a day or two? Just a few people I have to kill. Oh, thanks very much. No, nothing like that. They are her own. And they are military equipment, not something she hunts with. You don't really need armor and a sword and all that kind of thing to hunt rabbits or foxes. Now she storms into Asgard looking for blood, and though she's ready to fight all comers, the gods decline to do so. You see, shedding blood is forbidden within Asgard, and the gods hide behind that very convenient little legal nicety, since presumably nobody wants to go outside and fight this fearsome-looking woman. I mean, Odin doesn't try chucking his great spear that cannot miss Gungnir. Even Thor apparently not too keen on the idea. Unless, of course, maybe he wasn't there at the time. Anyway, so since they can't, or rather won't, fight her, the gods offer her compensation for her loss. What would she accept for the fact that they squished her eagle father? Now she has to think about it, and she sees a golden opportunity for self-advancement. Oh yes, she turns this very much to her advantage, and she agrees that if the gods allow her to marry one of them, thus of course becoming a god herself, and also if they can make her laugh, she will consider her debt of honor to be paid. To begin with, Odin takes her father's eyes and he throws them into the sky, where they become stars, and there they are now, twinkling away in the heavens. How lovely. That's a good start. But there is the matter of making her laugh. Now, this is a bit harder than just taking a couple of eyes and chucking them up into the sky. Skadi has absolutely no sense of humor. Jotnar are not noted for their happy, jovial personalities at the best of times. They are seldom the life and soul of the party, and Skadi is pretty much at the bottom end of the scale as far as humor goes. But the gods do their best to, well, at least get a smile out of her. They tell her the funniest jokes they know. They tell her these side-splitting jokes and have people rolling around on the ground in hysterics, and she's like, yeah. They pull silly faces. And she's boring. This is not going very well. So eventually, Loki is given the task of making this woman laugh. Get her to laugh. Which seems actually quite appropriate, since he really is the one most responsible for her being there in the first place. And he rises to the task brilliantly. This is Loki at his best. He ties one end of a rope to a goat, and the other end he ties to his own testicles. And he and the goat have a great tug of war, which the goat wins, giving a mighty heave. And Loki, with no doubt a suitable cry of extreme agony, as his chances of any more children are seriously diminished, is pulled off his feet and lands in Skadi's lap. And she laughs. Well, she chuckled, at least. But everyone agrees that is sufficient. I mean, a chuckle from Skadi is probably the equal of a belly laugh from anybody else. So that part is taken care of. Then there is the task of finding a husband for her and making her a god. And obviously the best way to do that is for all the gods to line up, and then she can walk down the line and select the one she likes best. Excellent. That seems a very logical thing. But for some strange reason, the gods insist that she must choose her husband solely by his feet. No pun intended with that one. So in order to accomplish this very curious method of husband selection, all the gods line up behind a curtain with only their feet visible. Skadi chooses the one with the cleanest, nicest feet, thinking it must belong to the beautiful Balder. But the nice, clean feet are actually the result of time spent at the seaside, in seawater, and they belong to Njord. He lives beside the sea. He spends much of his time in the water. Indeed, he is seen as a sea god. So his feet have a distinct advantage over those of the other gods. Skadi isn't exactly chuffed at that. Balder would have been her preference, so of course he was married to Nanna at the time, but who cares about details like that. But when she discovers how kind and decent Njord is, she accepts that she has a good bargain. He's a nice man. He will be a caring and loving husband. And she appreciates that she is actually quite lucky in her choice, and he is one of the nicest of all the gods. She and Njord are married with great ceremony. Thus, she is no longer seen just as a Jotun, but becomes a goddess of Asgard, a member of the Vanir, and she will become associated with winter, with skiing, hunting, mountains, and archery, and seen as representing endurance and courage. But, as I said earlier, though often called the goddess of winter, her activities in the snow-capped mountains of Jotunheim actually give her no more than an association with it. She may represent it in a sort of symbolic manner, but that is all. So she and Njord are now husband and wife. Asgard has a new goddess among its ranks, and she willingly accepts Njord's children, Throir and Froya, as her stepchildren. But where shall the couple live? Hmm. There's a problem, a considerable problem. It becomes the first little crack in the marriage, since they come from vastly differing backgrounds and they can't agree on that rather important matter of where they're going to live. She wanting to reside in her father's dark thunder home, high up in the cold and the wind of the mountains, where the snow never melts, where she feels at home and she can ski and hunt beneath the grey rolling clouds, while he wants to live in the lovely, bright, warm Norton, the so-called place of ships on the seashore, enjoying the sound of the waves and the feel of the sand under his feet. But they reach a seemingly sensible compromise. They will stay first in one and then in the other, which sounds like a pretty good idea. So to begin with, they first travel to Thrymain, where they stay for 9 nights. It's bracingly cold, the sky is grey, you hardly ever see the sun, the snow lies deep all around, just the way Skadi likes it. But Njolde is not impressed. Oh, no, not a bit. And when they come down, he complains bitterly. Hateful for me are the mountains. I was not long there, only 9 nights, but the howling of the wolves sounded ugly to me after the song of the swans. I never knew that swans actually sang or really made any noise at all. But anyway, we never mind that. So they spend the next 9 nights in Norton. But that didn't really work out any better. Njolde, of course, delighted with the sand and the sea and the cries of the seabirds, happily splashing in the surf. But this time, Skadi complains. Sleep I could not on the seabeds for the screeching of the bird. That gull wakes me when from the wide sea he comes each morning. So after a mere 18 days of living together in a state of rather less than marital bliss, the couple realize that they are totally incompatible. And not due to anything bad about either of them. Personally, they're both very nice, and they certainly are in love, but they are terribly mismatched, and so they separate. She returning to her mountains, and he to the seashore. Though obviously she does return to Osgada on occasion, and have dealings with the other gods. She is still a goddess of the Vanir, after all. And later on, she is involved in a very dramatic incident, recounted in the poem Lokasenna from the Poetic Edda. There is a big feast given by the Jotun Eir, a sea god and the husband of Ron, who frequently hosts the gods in his hall. Odin attends, as do Loki, Sif, Bragi and his wife Idun. Tyr, Njolder is there, along with Skadi, Freyr and Throya, as well as Odin's son Vidar, and a number of other gods, as well as some of the elves, though Thor hasn't arrived as yet. Loki gets the proceedings off to a rather unfortunate start, getting himself thrown out by the other gods for killing a servant. Not really the sort of dinner guest you really want to have. You could run out of servants rather quickly. But he returns, demanding, demanding that the rules of hospitality be applied, rather ignoring, of course, his own considerable lack of hospitality towards the unfortunate servant. And Bragi, quite rightly, tells him to get lost. But Loki insists, and he keeps insisting, and eventually Vidar makes a space for him and pours him a drink, probably just to shut him up. But Loki is just looking for trouble. He doesn't really want to sit there and have a drink. He wants to cause a bit of mischief. But he is Loki, after all. He begins insulting various gods, taunting them, accusing them of immorality, sleeping around, and so on. Of course, rather ignoring the fact that he himself was hardly the one to talk about others, having been intimate with a stallion while he was shapeshifted into the form of a mare and subsequently gave birth to a foal. Freya intervenes, but Loki rounds on her, and after a heated exchange, he brings up the subject of her romantic liaisons with her own brother, such as the time that the gods walked in and they found her very romantically, shall we say, sitting astride him. And we won't go into any further details there, which of course everyone knows about, but the subject is never, it's not really brought into polite conversation. But it's a great subject to stir things up with. And he says, be silent, Freya, thou art a sorceress, and with much evil blended, since against thy brother thou the gentle powers excited. And then, Freya, what didst thou do? Now Njorda counters the insult to his daughter with a blast at Loki, subtly reminding him of the time he was intimate with a horse and gave birth to Sleipnir. It is no great wonder if silk-clad dames get themselves husbands and lovers. But 'tis a wonder that a wretched man that has borne children should herein enter. To which Loki retorts, this time bringing up the rather unusual conception of Njord's children. Cease now, Njord, in bounds contain thyself. I will no longer keep it a secret. It was with thy sister thou hadst such a son hardly worse than thyself. So by this time, in his little hissy fit, Loki has managed to insult Bragi, Idun, Gefn, Odin, Frigg, Njord, Skadi, Freyr and Froya, Tyr, Heimdall, and Sif, which is not bad going for one hissy fit. But Skadi, being Skadi, the woman who will reach out for weapons and set out looking for blood if you annoy her, she goes further than just rebuking him or trading insults, and she threatens him in no uncertain terms. Thou art merry, Loki. Not long wilt thou frisk with an unbound tail. For thee, on a rock's point, with the entrails of thy ice-cold son, the gods will bind. Well, that was certainly telling him. Thor finally arrives, and he's mightily unimpressed with all this. He doesn't think much of this situation at all, threatening Loki with his hammer, who wisely decides to leave, while his head is still intact and where he wants it to be, on his shoulders. The gods decide to punish Loki later on, and they apparently took note of Skadi's rather bloodthirsty idea, since they do indeed bind Loki to a rock using the entrails of his son Nari, who was, as Skadi had mentioned, very ice cold indeed after they pulled his guts out. Now, perhaps because of her being a Jotun, and the Jotun being associated with dangerous animals like wolves and snakes and such like, Skadi gets the job of punishing Loki, which I'm sure she probably greatly enjoyed, since he was clearly not her favourite person, and the whole rock entrail binding thing was, after all, her idea. And she adds the finishing touch. Oh, and what a finishing touch! Putting a venomous snake directly over his face, a snake constantly dripping venom from its fangs, as Loki's wife, Sigyn, has to sit and hold a basin beneath the snake to try and catch the venom, but each time the basin is full, she has to empty it, thus allowing the venom to fall directly onto Loki's face. His agonized writhings each time that happens, causing earthquakes, which no doubt only added to Skadi's enjoyment. So, there we have the story of Skadi's wedding. Not a particularly romantic tale, I suppose, the marriage being rather a total disaster, though she and Njord seemed to remain friends afterwards. I hope you enjoyed it. So, until next time, it only remains for me to say farewell and goodbye until